so excited to welcome my friend and journalism expert, Gina Baleria, to the podcast today. Welcome, Gina.
Oh, I'm so excited.
So I do have to tell listeners how we know each other because we have known each other for years. And we met when we did an independent theater production together, The Women of Manhattan.
That's
and it was
right.
amazing. And we've been in touch ever since. And I've just watched your career and your accomplishments just grow and grow and grow over the years. And I love that you are helping to teach the next generation of journalists. I know this is something you feel really passionate about. Let's talk a little bit about the state of journalism today.
Sure.
And what is our disconnect to what's happening?
When you say disconnect, do you mean the fact that there's all this reality going on and then there's this ecosystem that doesn't seem to match?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's such a big issue. I don't think there's one thing, but if you're talking about journalism, the industry and the information, first of all, social media, everybody has access and everybody can say anything they want. And if you make it look a certain way, or if you say the right things, use the right buzzwords, people will start to trust you and follow you, and you can be led into rabbit holes. And social media is you have your own reality there. And in a way, that can be great because voices that weren't able to break into traditional legacy forms of media can now make their voices heard. So that's really amazing. Mm-hmm. But there's, always a flip side. And the flip side is people can, again, create their own ecosystems. And we then start to live in different realities with different mm-hmm. information and very disconnected from each other inside social media bubbles and filter bubbles. So social media and the way it's sort of structured and, the algorithms push us. The algorithms on a lot of social media platforms are designed to push us into these filter bubbles and not to connect us across differences. And then with regard to the journalism industry itself, there has been, a real contraction over the past several years, and that has been accelerated by hedge funds buying up local news outlets, not because they care about journalism, but because those local news outlets own real estate and you can sell that for a profit and then sort of siphon the money out of the community rather than reinvesting it in journalism. So these newspapers have just been doing more and more with fewer and fewer resources, and they've had, fewer reporters and other staff to cover their local communities. The pages are then filled with syndicated content and advertising content. And as people are less aware of what's going on in their local community and only seeing national news, there are studies that show that leads to more polarization, that leads to less civic engagement, that leads to a whole host of issues. So we're in this place now where we're really kind of fractured, and we can see it in our news, and it's I'm not quite sure how to solve it, but I'm trying to be part of that conversation.
You are trying your small but mighty attempts to change that. Do you think the quality of reporters and journalists have changed?
Honestly, I don't. I'm not sure I can answer that. I'm not sure I'm the one to really answer that, but here's what I'll say. I think it's always been true that you've had a spectrum of people doing amazing journalism, doing mediocre journalism, doing bad journalism. But not everyone had the largest megaphone. Even back when Edward R. Murrow was doing his amazing journalism, he was a standout, right? Even back when the muckrakers, the investigative journalists of the late 19th and early 20th century were coming on the scene and creating policy change, like instigating policy change. You also had yellow journalism in the late 19th century, which was tabloid journalism. So I don't necessarily think the quality has changed. In fact, I think that people who do journalism are very dedicated to it, but I think it just becomes difficult to do everything you want to do with fewer resources. And then, of course, you have people who are in journalism or who say they're doing journalism and aren't really doing that.
I was going to say the people that say they're journalists, but they're actually not. They're opining. They're not sort of following. I don't want to say the rules of journalism, but it is a practice. It is a profession, and it just feels like, and I don't know, maybe this is my Gen X showing that this integrity that I felt like was more present in journalism in terms of, verifying your sources and, not revealing everything until you had all the facts, and just, I don't know. It just feels like, to those of us that are not in journalism, it feels like that's slipped a little bit. And I would love some reassurance, although I don't know that you're the one that can give me the reassurance that that's not the case. I think we see these highlights of people that are still trying to, they're still the people we can trust. They're still going to be unbiased. I mean, Judy Woodruff comes to mind for me in terms of listening to NPR and PBS. But, as you said, a lot of these news outlets are beholden to different people than they were before.
Right. And I think, and I do think those standouts are there. For me, it's Rachel Martin on NPR.
Yes.
She's my favorite interviewer. I think she's amazing. There are a lot of standout journalists, and I'm not sure if the quality has slipped per se. I mean, you can argue that. I think it's just there are more voices, there are fewer resources. Good journalists can't do everything they want to do. They got to move on. And then maybe there's even an aspect of training, or an aspect of maybe not really knowing. You want to be a journalist, you get out there in the world and you don't really have the tools to do journalism well. And I always say, it is a practice. You're doing journalism. So, and for me, that means applying a process of verification, a process of transparency, a process of skepticism, et cetera, to your news gathering, and a process of trying to get outside your bias or your own biases, to make sure that you are really seeing what's out there and not missing it because you have blind spots. And we all have blind spots. Let's be clear. It's not a negative word. I know that bias has been sort of co-opted as a negative thing, but it's an evolutionary trait.
It's human. And also, you're always going to have your own human perspective when you investigate a story, when you report a story, the people you choose to interview. And so that is one of the positives around the proliferation of media is, like you said at the beginning, there's voices we haven't heard before and perspectives we haven't heard before that now have a platform where we can hear stories that we never would have heard with traditional, white male journalists that used to dominate the field. So, I'm very heartened by that. Now, your book, The Journalism Behind Journalism, Going Beyond the Basics to Train Effective Journalists in a Shifting Landscape. Thank you for writing that book. You also co-authored a book called Writing and Reporting News for the 21st Century. And so I want to talk a little bit about modern journalism and the modern, not so much the media landscape, but modern journalism and the skills that are required by modern journalists to continue to report stories that matter, stories that are unbiased, stories that inform and enlighten and engage us. You talked in your book about the fact of relating some intangibles to the practice of journalism, like curiosity, empathy, implicit bias, in order to get solid journalism. So can you talk to us a little bit about that, and especially the idea of centering communities impacted by a story into journalism to ensure that we're getting fair and accurate reporting?
Absolutely. So the basics of journalism, how to write well, how to interview, how to do research, how to be, all of those are being taught across journalism schools. And those are important. Those remain important. Those remain foundational. But the reason I wrote the book was because I started thinking about all of these things. There are these other skills that I sort of noticed that my students weren't being cultivated in my students. Other skills were being cultivated. And that, I think different generations, different skills are cultivated, and older generations are like, oh, they don't know. But I don't think that's it at all. I think, they have a different set of skills that are going to be quite valuable. But I started seeing a need to maybe be intentional about teaching some of these skills, like curiosity and empathy and tenacity, and recognizing your own unconscious biases, and intentionally thinking about communities outside your own, and who's impacted by who should be centered in this story. So, I wrote this book, and the reason these things are important to me is, to be a good journalist, you have to have empathy for the person in front of you. And it doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but you have to see their humanity. You have to see them as human, or you're not going to be able to do the story. If you walk in with a stereotype or a preconceived idea or an assumption, you're missing the story. You're flat out going to miss the story. I always tell my students when I'm teaching them to write, you can't say, if someone is arrested for committing a murder, you can't say they committed the murder. You weren't there. You can say they were arrested, because that. You can say they were accused. You can say they're on trial. You can say they're convicted. But how many times do we then have to say they were exonerated? That happens more often than we think. So you can't be the judge, jury, and executioner. You have to just report what you know. And you have to, look at the story and see the other side to it. So a couple examples you mentioned earlier, getting outside the traditional white male voice that is seen as neutral, which is not neutral at all. It's its own biased perspective. And there are some journalists who've done some great things. I want to specifically call out, there's a book out and a movie, She Said, and that's Megan Cantor, Jodie Cantor and Megan Twohey, who wrote about the Harvey Weinstein sexual assaults. And they were able, and of course, there was also Ronan Farrow, who was doing his own journalism. And the three of them were able to bring the story to light. And it really had a profound impact on women being able to share their voices or call out their accusers or feel empowered. And it ended up putting this, convicted perpetrator, now Harvey Weinstein, behind bars. And it was massive. And it was because, I would argue, two women were able to bring that perspective to the table of understanding what women go through and how serious it actually is, and to pursue that story and have a passion for pursuing that story. There were two other journalists at the Cleveland Plain Dealer several years ago who wrote about, they found out that Cleveland had a bunch of untested rape kits, and they were like, how many untested rape kits? And it was a lot. It was thousands. And then across Ohio, it was 10, like it was so much. And so they wrote about it. That why are these untested? And they started doing a series. And because of their series, the police department started testing the rape kits, and they discovered serial rapists that if they had just tested the rape kits, they would have caught them way before they convicted further assaults. And they talk about that fact of, not, it wasn't a bias. It was a perspective. I am a woman. This is important. This matters. And we're going to cover this story. And I'm not saying a male wouldn't cover that story. I'm saying I'm not sure that there would have been the devotion to it. Other stories might come up, or the awareness that story had needed to be covered.
Right.
So, so bringing your perspective to the table can give us a lot of, and that's same with Trayvon Martin, the Trayvon Martin killing in Florida several years ago. There was a Black journalist who the story was kind of a blip, and that he thought, his name escapes me right now, but he thought, that seems odd. That something doesn't seem right about that. So he started doing his own digging. And because of that journalist, who again brought his experiences to the table, we got good journalism, and we were able to really get into a story we needed to get into. That was
we were able to find out the truth because
able to find out the truth.
Committed to pursuing the story to the end.
Exactly.
And so my question, and I know a lot of people have this question.
Yeah.
I remember especially when people were reporting at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, the invasion.
Yeah.
And they were covering, they were filming these children trying to cross the border into Poland. And people were wondering, well, why doesn't the person filming or the person reporting get involved? And so can you talk to us a little bit, us lay people who are not in journalism, what's the rule? What's the principle around how involved a reporter can get in a story before then they are part of the story, which is what you don't want?
Right. I think if you see someone, I think it's up to the individual journalist. I mean, you're there to do a job because your job is bringing this issue to light for a massive audience, right? And without you there, this story doesn't get out into the world. So if I put my camera down to go help, then maybe I help that one person, but maybe a bunch of other people then suffer. I'm not saying I wouldn't help. I have no idea what I would do. Because there are plenty of examples of journalists who are engaged in the practice of journalism who see something and then just can't and stop and go help.
Right. Their empathy is too much, and so I'm just wondering what role that personal empathy plays for a reporter. Is it for reporters who are very empathetic by nature? Is it really hard for them?
I think most reporters, I don't know if I speak it, but I think empathy is a trait. I would say there are a lot of reporters, and myself included, after 9/11, who went through PTSD, who, but we don't get we're first responders in a lot of ways. And we, fire, police, paramedics, they have structures and systems in place to deal with trauma. And journalists just don't. There's a center called the DART Center that actually focuses on trauma in journalism and helping journalists manage that. But you hear about journalists getting burnout, and sometimes it's that trauma, it's that PTSD. But if you tell a story well and do good and get the truth out and make a difference, that can mitigate the impact somewhat. But it's, someone who sits there and holds the camera and films it and doesn't go help, that person's not unempathetic. That person is just as affected and is probably going to experience PTSD. But they made a decision in that moment, which you have to make these split-second decisions all the time. What's going to do the greatest good? It's always weighing, right? It's weighing. It's if I do this, that's going to be good. But if I do this, that's going to do more good.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. You're making those hard choices.
Yeah.
And so when you in your book and when you teach your students, what do you teach them around developing empathy? Because I know you believe that empathy is an important skill to be a solid journalist. Yeah. So how do you talk to them around balancing that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I talk to them about self-care. I have a chapter in my book on self-care, and I talk to them about putting structures and systems in place to manage, because trauma will happen. You will cover hard things. You will cover things that you're never going to unsee. And for me, it was worth it. It's through the mission of getting the truth out, informing the public so that they had the information to be able to make decisions. It was worth it. Totally worth it. But you have to manage that. And you talk about personal empathy. And so the way I would define empathy is that it's just seeing the humanity in another. Again, it doesn't mean you're agreeing. It doesn't mean you're because there's that sort of over empathizing and getting too personally involved.
Well, you have to have boundaries.
You lose perspective. Yeah.
If you are going to be effectively empathetic with someone.
Exactly.
You still have to protect yourself, and you can understand someone, you can connect with them on an emotional level. But I often talk about the myths of empathy, which is that it's not being nice, it's not agreeing with somebody, and it's not just doing what somebody else wants you to do. That's not empathy either, but it's being able to see a situation through someone else's eyes, and if you can act with compassion and turn that into action. Right. And it sounds to me like what you're saying is, for journalists, the act of compassion can often be making sure that story gets out there. Right. Not just necessarily helping that one individual, but for the greater good, my act of compassion is to make sure the story gets reported fairly and it's amplified.
Exactly. And also that I am not getting so involved that I lose my perspective, that I get lost in the story. There's a situation when I used to work at a station, and I'll keep it vague because I'm not sure how much I can give up, but I was working at a station, and there was a missing child. And I think this is a misnomer. The public thinks, oh, the media are vultures. And I want to share this story because the reporter on that story, he was covering the story and got connected with the family. And I will say that the reporter was of Latino descent, and the family was also. And that may or may not have played a role in their connection, but they made a connection. Mm-hmm. And so the reporter was so caring about the story. The reporter, asked permission, and they started to trust him, and they invited him into the home. And then when they learned that the child was dead and that the perpetrator was a member of the family, they still let him in because they trusted him. And he would call. I mean, we all would, but he would call every morning. Did they find her yet? I'm coming into work. Did they find her yet? There's so much empathy for this story and this family. And yet we were still doing the story well. We were giving the public information, keeping them apprised. But the family really trusted this reporter. And so, expressing care, centering the family and the family's needs, helping the family understand privacy versus the public interest. It's like, that's another balance you have to make. It's not always cut and dry. Yeah, there are privacy issues here, but is it more important for the public to know, or is it more important to keep the privacy intact? And those are decisions you have to make. But he was able to not get permission from the family. That's not the point, but he was able to
connect and
engender
build trust.
Yeah, and build trust. So that's an important thing to think about, is making connections with your sources, not to get lost, but to tell the story with care and center the people involved in the story.
Is that hard for young wannabe journalists, do you think? Or
well, that's
do
why
they
I wrote
embrace that?
that's why I wrote the book, because I think it's not hard for everybody, but I think sometimes it just doesn't occur to people. I think in this day and age where we're constantly on social media, where we're always looking at our phones or doing things inside our phones, engaging with others through our phones, that when you're actually in a real life situation, I noticed that with my students, when they're actually in a real life situation, I have to kind of walk them step by step through, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah. But things that I would have taken for granted.
Yeah.
And so I think, so this idea of, I don't think it's hard, I just think it hasn't been cultivated.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So, we can't have a conversation about media without talking about media literacy and how to reduce our draw to misinformation.
Right.
What can we do about it? We feel so deeply, and so much news is about activating our emotional triggers these days, whether it's clickbait, whether it's like a shocking headline, whether it's, my favorite is the ones where news programs will average like, this thing in your house could be killing you. We'll talk about it in 3 hours. Right.
Right.
Like, no, I need to know that now. Right. But where can we, as the consumers of media, get better about reducing our draw to that misinformation? And I know it's fighting against our human trait of curiosity and being drawn to the accident, being drawn to the drama, right? So how can we make ourselves a little bit more media literate in order to understand what we're seeing?
Yeah. And that's a challenge. And I talk with my students, I said, you can put the information out there, but you cannot control how people receive it.
Exactly.
And so as a journalist, you can be transparent. You can make sure you can defend your work. If someone comes at you, make sure you feel really foundationally solid in what you're doing. And you can, treat people with respect as they engage with you, unless they're trolls, and then pass that. But on the consumer side, the problem is, not only do our brains feast on that stuff, the people who create that content know that, and
of course, they're playing right into it.
Exactly. And so you've got this really, really sophisticated ecosystem of algorithms and content that we have very little defense against. So it'd be nice to see some regulation sort of control some of that, but that would never do the full trick. So what can we do as consumers? I would say we should engage with people who are different than us, walk on the street, say hi, look up. Even those tiny little interactions can honestly have this profound impact. I work with an organization called Civity, and we just put a digital interaction into a Stanford study of 31,000 people who tested interventions. And we were number one or number two at increasing social trust and reducing partisan animosity. We're in the top few. And it was all about engagement. It was all about seeing the humanity in another. And so I know that's not necessarily here's what you do online, look for this, look for that. But I think that is foundational.
But it plays into that. Yeah. And I just want to, Civity, Civity. We'll put all the links of these great things you're mentioning in the show notes, but I just want to call that out to
Civity.org. Civity.org.
Great. Yeah. So it's really about, I've had him on my show, and I've mentioned him on several episodes. There's a gentleman named Edwin Rutch out of Berkeley, who you may be familiar with. He runs the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and he has run empathy circles at the most divisive political rallies that we've had in the last few years. And I think the biggest thing is the goal is not to, we've fallen into this trap as we consume media, as we react to media and comment online or call into podcasts or radio shows, where our mission is to convert. We feel like the debate has to lead to a conversion,
right,
or a persuasion. We've lost the ability to have the debate and understand different points of view and leave that conversation potentially in the same camp as we were when we entered it, but understanding the context of the other person.
Yeah.
And I don't know when when that happened.
Right.
All of a sudden it was about, like my comment on your article online has to be abrasive and direct. And because I'm trying to convince you that you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about that rather than really trying to understand your point,
Yeah.
not agree with, but understand. And I mean, I think social media is part of that. And a lot of that content is bot content, but it models for humans how they think they should act. And so we get that really abrasive, problematic content. And yeah, I think I'm thankful to have grown up in a household of loving parents who are diametrically opposed to me on a lot of issues. And so you have to navigate that, right? Like they're my parents. Right. So, I'm really grateful. And I say this, I think in my acknowledge in my little dedication section in the book, but I'm really grateful for that because they really helped me learn that I needed to understand other people's perspectives, help me defend my own, and how much common ground we actually do have once you get past the knee jerk. Issues like abortion, gun control. My God, when you actually start talking, you agree on 90% of it. We do. We just do. And then the stuff we disagree with, we can navigate that little bit once we understand we have a lot of commonalities.
You're making me think of a guest that I had on a while ago, Monica Guzman, who wrote a book called I Never Thought of It That Way. And she actually talks a lot about her family and the fact that she is diametrically opposed politically with her own parents.
Yes.
And just talking about how we can have more civil conversations. And for me, this is linked with media because I think for better or worse, media, whether it's true journalism or the clickbait or the, I don't even know what you call the opposite of good journalism, like the hacks out there.
Bad journalism, talk show, tabloid.
Exactly. All of that is
misinformation,
influencing how we have conversations. It's influencing how we're interacting with each other. And we want to think it doesn't, but it does.
Oh, it totally does. And so it does come, it's the awareness. It's walking into a social media space or digital media space saying, I am aware that a lot of this content may be trying to influence me in some way. And I need to have strategies for dealing with it. So for example, when I go on to, and I don't go much anymore because it's turned into a space that prioritizes trying to push content on me rather than letting me see the content I want. But when I go onto Facebook, there's a lot of suggested content. And the minute I see something that says suggested content, I'm off the feed. Because I'm like, there's no need for me to be here because then it just gets more and more frequent as I move through the feed. So the first one I see, I stop scrolling. And that's a strategy I have that I have in place. So you have to develop strategies for yourself and you have to, we all get into that, or a lot of people get into that mindless scrolling.
Yes.
And that's what's going to take you. Yeah, doom scrolling. And that's going to take you down a rabbit hole. Or even you start with, this is a cute dog and look at this bunny. And an hour, 2 hours later, you're at the, let's blow up the world. Wait, what just happened? So you have to retain some sort of awareness or set a time limit for yourself, an alarm. I mean, have external cues for yourself. Do whatever you need to do I don't have the self-discipline to realize an hour has passed, right? But if I have an alarm or if I have limits on myself that I can apply, then that helps me. So, we're not going to fix the algorithms. We're not going to fix the digital media ecosystem. We can lobby, we can make our voices heard, and we can set our own structures to manage the content. And then the last thing is understanding who the reputable sources are, developing.
I was going to say checking our own sources. Yep. I've taken to doing that too, where it's like, okay, this article, this journalist, quote unquote, whether a real journalist or not, is saying something. I'm going to actually go check that out elsewhere and see if that's actually legit.
Yeah, I had an old boss who used to say, "Don't just do something, sit there." And he said it to me because I constantly am in motion, but I loved it because it really applies. Like instead, like you see something, it shocks you. Of course, it's meant to shock you. It's meant to draw out emotion. Stop, take a breath. Don't share it. Just give yourself a second. Go walk away. See if you can find it anywhere else on the internet. Is anyone else covering the story? Is anyone else saying this?
Is it confirmed elsewhere?
Exactly. And only after you've done a little bit of, and I know that that's a lot of work, but then it's not worth sharing. If you're not willing to sort of do the work, then it's not worth sharing.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I love it. Well, and also, thank you for your podcast, News in Context, which I always find very, very eye-opening around exactly that, putting the news and the headlines that we're seeing in context of what's going on in culture, what's going on in society, what's going on in the geopolitical space, and really helping us understand how to be more discerning as we consume different media and different media sources. So I'm going to put a link to News in Context in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
Gina, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for your insights and for your work with, working with the next generation of journalists and hopefully and keeping the integrity and the heart into that field. Thank you for that.
Maria, it's been a real pleasure. I mean, I adore you, and I am just so excited to be able to talk with you about this topic.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to another great episode of the Empathy Edge podcast. If you like it, share it with a colleague or a friend. Don't forget to rate and review. And until next time, please remember that cash flow, creativity, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. Take care and be kind.